Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy it. Janet Simpson burst into the living room, put her hands on her hips and shouted, "Damn it, George, are you going to take out the trash or not?" George Simpson slowly lowered the newspaper, looked coldly at his wife, and answered in a calm voice, "I told you I would take out the damn trash as soon as I finished reading the newspaper." Janet returned to the kitchen, muttering, "To hell with it, let it rot," and snorted. George sat there, feeling his blood pressure rise. He didn't know how much longer he could endure this. Their relationship had been going downhill for months. It seemed his wife was doing everything she could to ruin their marriage. He stood up, walked over to the bar and poured himself some scotch without ice. Returning to his chair, he leaned back and wondered, what the hell is going on? He asked himself again, taking a sip. He mentally returned to the past. Damn, he thought, I once adored her, literally worshipped her. Now I get chills when she walks into a room. His thoughts went back to when he met Janet in college. He was a senior in business, and she was a second-year education major. At first glance he realized that he had found his life partner. In his eyes, she was the embodiment of femininity. She was short, about 160 centimeters, with a figure that in his opinion was ideal. She had light brown hair, brown eyes, and the cutest lips he had ever seen. As he got to know her better, he was fascinated by her personality. She was sweet, kind, and smart. He courted her with passion, and it didn't take long before they became a couple. Their friends knew that if they saw George, they could be sure that Janet would be there too. George smiled slightly, remembering their first date. They spent the whole evening talking. They seemed to feel each other as if they had known each other all their lives. George knew he didn't want to ruin anything. When the evening ended and he dropped her off at her dorm, he simply took her hand to say goodbye. Janet leaned over and kissed his cheek, quietly asking, "Will you call me George?" He blushed and stammered, of course, I'll definitely call." And he did. On the third date, as they were saying goodbye, Janet leaned over and kissed him, asking again, "Will you call me George?" Again George smiled and replied, "Of course." They both laughed. On the fourth date, as George was driving her home, Janet suggested, "The lake should be beautiful tonight. Let's drive there." A year later they made love. He knew she wanted to wait and he respected her wishes. They immediately began living together. As soon as George graduated from college, he took a job in the area as a marketing intern and rented an apartment. The salary wasn't very big, but he saw potential in it. Janet continued her studies and received a degree in education. 2 years later they got married, and almost a year later they had twins, a boy and a girl. They were delighted. They had planned to have 2 children, and here they were, as they say, in one fell swoop. Janet wanted to stay home with the children, and George agreed. It also seemed important to him that she be a housewife at least for a while. It was financially tight, but they managed. George was given more responsibility, and promoted as he demonstrated his competence. Janet was insistent that they buy a house and convinced George that now that the twins were over a year old, it was time for her to look for a teaching job. With the extra income, buying a home became more than possible. Daycare was available for twins. Marge, her friend from college who was married to a teacher, told her that there were openings in the suburban school system where her husband worked. Armed with her credentials, she interviewed and was hired as a high school teacher for the fall semester. Although George wasn't entirely thrilled with her going to work so soon, he recognized her desire to have a home and didn't put up too much of a fight. The extra income quickly allowed them to get a mortgage, and they began looking for housing in the Janet School District. Marge was again a big help in convincing them to look at properties in her area. It didn't take long before they found a house that Janet loved, which just so happened to be 3 doors down from Marge and Phil Brock's house. The 2 couples became very close friends. Marge and Phil had a boy a year older than the twins and a girl just a few months younger. They often exchanged dinners and spent many summer holidays together. Although George did not consider Phil a close friend or confidant, he recognized that Janet felt very close to both of them, and of course he went along with it. As the years passed, George rose through the ranks of the company to a management position, enjoying the salary along the way. Janet also remained with the school district, led her department, and was just promoted to assistant principal of the high school. This promotion was facilitated by Phil Brock, who transferred from the high school and was appointed principal of that same school. The children surfaced in George's thoughts, and he realized that they were now 22 years old and already independent. My God, where did the years go? He thought. Now we should enjoy life with less responsibility, enough money and time to enjoy life with each other. Why did everything suddenly go wrong? Things came to a head at Brock's Christmas party. The place was crowded with neighbors and colleagues from school. The alcohol flowed freely as usual, and George soon felt that he was no longer in pain. The whole evening seemed vague to him. He remembered dancing with Jan, then with Marge, and it seemed with several other women. He remembered how Marge had kissed him under the mistletoe for a quick kiss. Then everything became even more blurry. He could have sworn he saw Janet with some guy, but that wasn't clear either. He remembered that he was angry with her, but he no longer remembered why. The morning after the party, George and Janet staggered home, took off their outerwear in the living room, and swayed to the bedroom. Who knows what time it was? Later in the morning, Jan shouted to him that she was going to take the clothes to the dry cleaners on Monday, and would include the jacket he wore to the party. He mumbled agreement as he slowly walked toward the bathroom. Suddenly the door swung open, and he saw Janet standing with hot eyes, holding a lavender bikini. George stood rooted to the spot, his mouth open. He muttered, "What are you talking about?" he asked, feeling his headache getting stronger. Son of a... I just knew you were cheating on me, and here's the proof. You didn't even bother to get rid of the evidence, Janet shouted. George stumbled back and knocked her hand away from his face. What the hell are you talking about? Are you crazy? What do I know about panties? Janet lowered her voice and hissed, "They were in your pocket, honey. You forgot to get rid of them. You just stuffed them in your jacket pocket before you cheated on me." George looked at her in complete bewilderment. Who was this woman? He had never seen Janet so angry. Reason took over and he softly told her, "Janet, I've never seen these things before in my life, and I honestly have no idea how they ended up in my pocket. I can't believe you think I cheated on you. That will never happen. It never was and never will be." Janet's eyes softened for a moment, then became cold again. "You lie, George Simpson, and I will get back at you. You think you can cheat?" Panties in her fist, Janet turned and left the bathroom, leaving George standing there, looking after her without understanding anything. To say that the following days in the Simpson house were tense would be an understatement. Janet did not speak to him except when absolutely necessary. George tried over and over again to get her to talk, to no avail. She refused to listen to him. She had already decided that he was cheating, and no amount of talk could convince her otherwise. What George couldn't understand was why she was so confident. It couldn't just be those damn panties. He honestly had no idea how they ended up in his pocket. How could she be so sure of his infidelity on such weak grounds? Where was the trust? Why did she suddenly turn into such a jealous witch? George thought about it. Did he miss something? He suddenly realized, perhaps belatedly, that Janet's behavior and attitude had gradually changed since the beginning of the fall when she accepted her new position as assistant principal. The changes were subtle and gradual, so gradual that he didn't notice. He now realized that it had started since the beginning of the school year. Janet seemed a little withdrawn and thoughtful, as if she had something on her mind. Little by little she became irritable and impatient with him. Little things drove her crazy. By the end of the year, she was almost a different person. At first he chalked it up to stress from her new position. She now had more responsibility and worries, but it had to be something more. Very gradually, a coolness arose between them. The small gestures of tenderness were gone. What happened to that sweet and patient disposition? He also realized that night with Janet had become a rare occurrence. With some surprise he admitted that they had not made love for over a month, or was it 2? It was always something like the proverbial headache, "I think my period is starting," or "I think my throat is starting to hurt," etc. He didn't make the lack of physical intimacy an issue, given the growing gap. He realized with more than a little unease that he really didn't have much desire to make love to her. On New Year's Eve, Janet approached him. She stood in the doorway of the office where he was and said, "George, I've got your suit dry cleaned. We're going to the Salter New Year's party tonight. Be ready by 8. With these words she turned and left. George sat and looked after her. These were the first words from her all day. He really didn't think they would go anywhere tonight, much less to a party. He shook his head sadly but knew he would go. He was too tired to argue. If she wanted to go to a party tonight, then fine. He felt a little strange. He really didn't think she would be in the mood for another party, considering what happened at the last one. Well, he thought, at least it's within walking distance. I won't have to worry about driving tonight. At exactly 8 p.m., they walked down the street to the house of Harry and Susan Salter. It was a big building. The Salters had built an addition and done many renovations. They also spent a ton of money building a huge suite of rooms in the basement, including a TV room, billiards room, sauna, and communal games area. Their house definitely had enough space for a party of that size. It seemed like the whole neighborhood was there. People were crowded throughout the house, from the kitchen to the family room, and of course the basement. Janet walked away from him as soon as they entered the house, and George did not know where she had disappeared to. He had made a conscious decision to strictly limit his drinking. He wanted to be clear-headed tonight. He was soon deep in conversation with several men, sipping from a glass of whiskey. He swore that this would be his only drink for the entire night. Time passed, and he was surprised to hear everyone counting down to the new year. He looked around for Janet, but she was nowhere to be seen. The sight of all the couples kissing on New Year's Eve made him sad. At that moment he truly felt alone. He just didn't know what else could be done to save their marriage. George had had enough. He just wanted to go home and go to bed. This whole scene here depressed him. He started looking for Janet but was unsuccessful. She was neither in the basement nor on the first floor. Puzzled, he looked around, not knowing where else she could have gone. Perhaps she went to the bathroom. He went upstairs to find the hallway bathroom occupied. He then went into the master bedroom to check the master bathroom. Entering the room, he stopped and looked in bewilderment. He saw Janet kissing with a guy. "You!" George hissed. His face turned pale and his fingers clenched into fists. His anger was such that he actually trembled, trying to control himself. Janet turned away from Harry, looked at George and said coldly, "Upset George, you stupid. Now you know how it feels. Don't like it, huh?" George turned around and left the room. He slowly walked back towards his house, entering through the front door and heading towards their bedroom. He methodically removed all of his toiletries from the master bathroom and placed them in the guest bathroom. He then removed his clothes from the main closet and placed them in the guest bedroom. He vowed that he would never sleep in the same room as her again. The whole operation took him no more than 15 minutes. He undressed and was getting ready for bed when he heard the front door open and Janet enter. She walked upstairs and entered the master bedroom. After a few seconds, she headed to the guest room and burst through the door. "You are a coward," she hissed. "Just ran away like the coward that you are. Didn't like it, huh? It hurts when you find your spouse cheating, doesn't it? I knew you'd come looking for me at midnight. How did you like what you saw? You planned this, didn't you?" George said breathlessly, "You did this on purpose to hurt me. To humiliate me. You're completely crazy. You really need the services of a psychiatrist." He slowly approached her and firmly pushed her into the corridor, whispering, "Get away from me. If you want a divorce, you will get it. I will not contest it. Contact your lawyer. I will accept any terms you offer. I'm tired of you. I've reached my limit." George then closed the door forcefully in her face and locked it. Phil Brock sat in his office, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Everything is turning out exactly as I knew it would," he thought. "I knew it would take time, slowly but surely. It couldn't be obvious at first, just a little clue, then another little clue. Slowly but surely, Phil knew last year that he would get the job he wanted. He applied, interviewed, and was offered the job of high school principal, a position he had coveted since learning that Fran Higgins, the previous principal, was retiring. He had the qualifications and experience. He was almost sure that the job was his. It was a good step up the career ladder with additional responsibility and a decent salary increase. There was another reason he wanted the position. What no one ever knew was that he had been lusting after Janet Simpson for years. It almost became an obsession. When he got the position he wanted, he began planning to seduce Janet Simpson. He knew he had to be extremely careful. Janet was not a fool. She was a shrewd and very smart woman. His first step was to convince her to apply for the position of assistant principal. She had doubts when he first raised the issue with her, but he convinced her that she definitely had the skills and experience for the job, and that he would be happy to have her on his administrative team. She was flattered and applied. It was easy to guarantee her appointment. No one would challenge his decision on this issue. The first step was completed. Now they would work together every day. The second phase would begin when she started working at the beginning of the fall semester, but he had to be very, very careful. At first, only small hints. While sitting and eating a sandwich for lunch with Janet in the faculty cafeteria, he casually remarked, "Yesterday I had to go to the office building downtown, and I think I saw George going into Syros for lunch with a real hottie. Wow, he really has attractive clients. Lucky guy." Janet looked at him quizzically. "I don't think you've seen George, Phil. He told me last night that they ordered sandwiches because they were too busy to go out for lunch." "Oh, I guess I was wrong. Jan, it was probably just someone who looked like him. My attention was more focused on that pattern on his arm." Phil laughed. The following week, Phil learned that George had been called back to the office that evening due to some urgent issue. He didn't return home until 11 p.m. His wife, Marge, was on the phone that evening with Janet, and inadvertently passed this information on to Phil. The next day, again during a quick lunch they were having together, Phil commented almost in passing to Janet, "You know that guy I said George looked like? What a coincidence, but I swear I saw that guy coming out of the main Hilton Hotel. It was pretty dark so I couldn't see very well, but you can tell George that he has a doppelganger wandering around town." Phil then quickly changed the subject, but noted the line of concern on Janet's face. It took months, but he noticed certain changes in Janet. Her carefree, sunny, and open spirits seemed to be fading away. She was often a little moody and brooding. Small wrinkles appeared between her eyebrows. He didn't press, he had to be very careful. In December he was able to introduce the next phase. It was a couple of weeks or so before Christmas break when Janet walked into Phil Brock's office. "Phil, do you have a minute?" she asked. "Of course, January. I will always find time for you. Please have a seat." Janet looked nervous and unsure. She held a handkerchief in her hands, which she nervously twisted. Looking up at Phil, she said quietly, "Phil, I'm pretty sure George is cheating on me. I really don't know what to do. I'm afraid to confront him because I have no real proof. I really need some advice." Careful, careful, he thought to himself. Slowly, slowly, he reminded himself. Pulling Janet into the chair next to him and taking her hand in his, he said quietly, "I know, January. I've suspected it for a while now, but I really didn't know if I should even bring it up with you. What should I do, Phil? I love him. I don't want to lose him, but I can't come to terms with this," she said with tears in her eyes, stroking her hand. Phil looked at her seriously. "Don't do anything now, Janet. You don't have proof and you really need proof before you do anything. If you confront George now, he'll just deny everything. Let me help you, January. I know someone who can help. Let me work on this for a while. How can I continue to live like this, Phil? It's tearing me apart. George knows what I suspect. Things are really tense between us," Janet whispered. Phil squeezed her hand tightly, looking straight into her eyes. "You need to back off a little. January, don't provoke a conflict. Try to act as normal. Don't let the situation get out of control at home, okay?" Janet nodded silently. "What are you gonna do, Phil? What are you up to? Just leave it to me. It might take a while. I think we can get the evidence you need, but you need to act as normal as possible at home. Can you do that? Can you hold on?" Janet nodded again. "Thank you, Phil. Thank God for your friendship. I'll do as you say, even though it'll be damn hard." Phil warned her, "Don't say a word to anyone, January. Not even March. I trust her, of course, but this is a very delicate situation. This should remain just between us. Rest assured, everything will be resolved one way or another." With these words, Phil walked Janet to the door of his office. Closing the door behind her, he leaned against the wall and laughed quietly. "Oh yes," he thought. Oh yes, I'll be sleeping with her long before she knows. Quickly going to his desk, he picked up the phone and dialed a number. Teddy, this is Phil Brock. I have another little photo retouching job to do. Hey Phil. Teddy Dogadoo laughed. Teddy was one of the best photographic technicians in the East. He could take photographs, digitally process them, and show you a realistic image of Abraham Lincoln having dinner with Harry Truman, and you would believe it because it looked real. Another hot case, Phil? Teddy continued. The last time I did this for you was, 3 years ago? You never told me how it went. Everything went well, Teddy. You know you do a great job and you charge good money for it, Phil muttered. Teddy laughed. If you want better, you've got to pay. Phil, you pay pennies, you get monkeys. You know that. Okay, what's on your mind? Same crap, Teddy. I'll give you pictures of the guy, as many as I can and as varied as possible. I need pictures of some woman without anything, too. Put them together like last time, okay? Phil, no problem. Just this time, I won't be able to take it on right away. I'm swamped with a huge project. I won't be able to start your work until early next year. Can you wait that long? Phil thought for a moment. Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. In the meantime, I'll send you some basic photos as soon as I can. They ended the call and Phil sat back, thinking about his next steps. First, he needed pictures of George Simpson, preferably without anything or semi. This shouldn't have been a problem. He knew that George went to the fitness center at the club every other day, where he worked out and then took a shower. He would be there as if by chance, so Phil should have been able to take some pictures. Thank God for his cell phone camera. Now about the woman without clothes. The last time he used a woman of easy virtue, but since the police chief began actively cleaning up the area, she was no longer a likely option. However, he needed pictures of a without clothes, quite decent-looking woman. This could be a problem. Phil's eyes suddenly widened as an idea popped into his head, and he burst out laughing. Great, he thought. Just wonderful. Marge will help me get Janet into bed, and she won't even know it. Phil Brock left school early that day. He knew Marge would be home later. Entering his bedroom, he placed the camera on a book in the closet opposite the bed. He used a wide-angle lens and made sure a new card was loaded into the camera. He then set the timer to take a frame every 30 seconds. It would start the timer when appropriate. He stepped back and laughed. Damn, I'm so brilliant. Phil made himself a drink, sat down in a chair and turned on the news on TV. A little later his wife entered the house. Marge, glad you're back. Don't worry about dinner, I'll treat you. You deserve good food cooked by someone else, Phil said with a smile. Marge stopped and looked at him in surprise. You're kidding, right? What's the reason? No special occasion, darling. I just want to show my gratitude for everything you do for me, Phil flattered, smiling. After dinner, Phil helped her up the stairs to her bedroom. That evening he was able to get the photos he needed. The next day, New Year's Day, Janet was sitting alone in the kitchen. George had left early. No one knew where she heard him leave the house early in the morning, but she did not leave the room until she was sure he had left. She really couldn't face him. Her emotions were agitated. A mixture of anger, pain, jealousy, fear, and shame flooded her thoughts. Perhaps George is right, she thought. I could really use a good psychiatrist or at least a good divorce lawyer. It seemed pretty obvious that their marriage was over, and as far as she could tell, she just couldn't think of a reason for it. Why did George do this? She cried again and poured herself a cup of coffee. The next morning, Janet was called into Phil Brock's office. When she walked in, Phil noticed what everyone had been talking about, Janet Simpson's appearance. She was emaciated and pale. It was obvious that she had lost weight and her clothes seemed a little too big for her. It's time to end the game, Janet, Phil said. Good to see you. Please have a seat. We have a little problem regarding our trip to the university. The graduates we wanted to interview for open positions will not be available at the time we planned. We will have to go on Friday, and try to get as much done as possible on Friday and Saturday. We can come back on Sunday, so we won't miss too many school days. If you go on Friday morning, you can have everything ready by the time I get there early in the day. You shouldn't have any problems. Janet nodded silently. Phil looked at her nervously. Janet, you have to hold on. Look, I promise when this trip is over, everything will be over. I think all our suspicions will be confirmed. Janet's eyes widened. What do you mean, Phil? Phil smiled at her reassuringly. My investigator called yesterday and said he'll have everything by Friday morning. I'll bring everything with me when I go. And no, Jan, I don't know what he has yet. We'll find out soon enough. Janet sighed and stood up. I hope it makes me feel better. I can't go on like this anymore. I'll really be glad when this is all over. Thanks again, Phil. I really appreciate all your support. Phil touched her arm as she walked toward the door. Don't thank me yet, January. We're not done yet, but I promise everything will be fine. Early that Friday morning, Janet Simpson was driving along the highway toward the university. She drove the car, sticking to the speed limit almost mechanically. She was calm and collected, resigned to the information she was about to receive and the end of her marriage. She had endured months of anxiety and emotional turmoil, leaving her with nothing but emptiness, a vacuum where love and trust used to be. Even the anger and bitterness had disappeared. She arrived at her hotel, checked in, and then headed to campus. She went through the motions of setting up some interviews they were supposed to have later in the day. She tried to occupy her mind, not thinking about what Phil had, but knowing that the result would be what it should be. Later that day, Phil arrived and upon seeing Janet, stormily informed her that they would not talk about George, and that he would speak to her after dinner. Janet saw that he was clearly very upset and was puzzled. He seemed to have heard news that upset him much more than George's supposed infidelity. She sighed, knowing she would have to wait. Dinner that evening at the hotel with Phil passed almost silently. Phil seemed thoughtful and drank more wine than usual. He insisted that she join him by pouring her a glass, but she only took a sip from her glass, not wanting to get drunk. She felt that she would need all her mental faculties that evening. Phil, that's enough, Janet insisted. There's clearly something you want to tell me, something that upsets you. We need to talk and we need to do it now. Phil took a deep breath and replied, Yes, you're right, January. It's probably time. Come up to my room and I'll show you what I have. He stood up and, lowering his shoulders, led her out of the dining room. Entering his room, Phil sat her down on a chair and began to walk back and forth. Jan, he turned to her, I'm obviously very upset, but not just because of your torment. It looks like I'm in the same situation. With these words, he dumped a dozen photographs onto her lap. She picked them up and sobbed, tears appearing in her eyes. In front of her were pictures of George and Marge. She quickly looked away. The scenes before her were like acid to her soul. In an instant, she had the proof she needed but desperately didn't want. But Marge. She began to cry. One of my best friends. Why Marge? She sobbed, looking at Phil. She saw him standing there with his head down, a look of complete defeat on his face. She suddenly understood how he felt, and her heart responded to him. She quickly stood up and hugged him, holding him in her arms. Oh my God, Phil, it must be devastating for you to find out so suddenly and without warning, she said. She knew how he must feel and her heart ached for him. Everything was coming together now, all the months of planning were about to work out. Your mother's authority, growing mistrust and painful suspicions all lead to the fact that one day you decide to take a desperate step, installing a hidden camera in your own bedroom. And lo and behold, you click play and see something that will change your life forever. It's a story of love, betrayal, and an unexpected denouement that will be the starting point for a new chapter of life. My marriage was a real mistake, in fact it was the worst mistake of my life. The main problem wasn't my wife, she was normal in many ways. My problem was her mother, a real dragon who hated me more than anything in the world and never missed an opportunity to show her anger. Of course I wasn't a real nice guy, far from it, but I wasn't a real bad guy either. Every person has good and bad sides, nobody is perfect. I've never pretended to be a saint, and to be honest I've been involved in a few less than honest things. However, I've never been to jail for anything, though one day it was very close. My friend Nicholas, who was in law school at the time, saved me. Nicholas and I have been friends since school. He was a small guy with thick glasses and always preferred to read books rather than join the rest of the boys who teased the girls. When a couple of boys at school chose him as a victim of their bullying, I felt sorry for him and told everyone that I would beat up anyone who dared to offend Nicholas. 2 guys did it and I kept my word. Today, as I start writing this story, I am 32 years old. I am a self-employed well driller, which means I drill holes about 100 meters deep for heating pipes and make good money from it. I have been married to Lisette for almost 6 years, and we have a son who was born just 5 months after our wedding. We have a nice house in a small Scandinavian town and could be your average family, but we are not because of her mother, the dragon, who hates me so much for getting her daughter pregnant while she had a boyfriend chosen by her mother. I must say that I have lost many battles, but I hope to win the last round. This whole mess started on the eve of the summer solstice 6 years ago. The summer solstice is the shortest night of the year, and has been celebrated as a sacred night here in Scandinavia since ancient times when the Vikings ruled the land. It's a romantic night with the midnight sun in the north, and just a few hours of soft twilight in the south, with wild parties everywhere. At that time I was engaged to a beautiful girl named La, and we planned to move in together on August 1st, when I was promised a 3-room apartment to replace the 2-room one I had at that time. But La and I had a fight because she was going to her cousin's wedding on Midsummer's Eve and I wasn't invited along, which was a serious breach of etiquette since engaged couples are treated as equals to married ones, and should always be invited together. I was sure that no other engaged couple was invited individually. La also realized that this was a humiliation for me because of my old reputation as a bad boy. I have never done anything wrong to my girlfriend or her cousin whom I had never even met. La agreed that I was right but refused to choose me for this wonderful evening, and didn't want to stay at home instead of going to the wedding. If the wedding had been on any other weekend, I would have been happy to stay home. Even if I had been invited, I would have done my best to find an excuse not to go. I didn't blame my cousin, it was her right to choose the guests and exclude people she didn't like. I blamed La for accepting such a humiliating invitation on the summer solstice, the most important day of the year. We quarreled, and when she left my apartment in a huff on Midsummer's Eve morning, our engagement was called off. I told her that if her damn cousin was more important than her boyfriend, then let her stay there forever because I didn't want her back. After an hour, I regretted losing her and called her several times throughout the day, but her phone was off. La and I were also invited to a big party at a friend's cottage. I went there alone and had a good time as a new bachelor. At the party I danced a few times with a rather nice girl, Lisette, who was there with her cowardly fiancé who had a hard time with alcohol. I didn't know her well at the time, but I found her quite attractive. When her boyfriend got too drunk, I offered to help her get him into the back seat of his car. Lisette and I returned to the party for a while, and then went for a romantic walk to a nearby lake. I think she was impressed by my old and incorrect reputation as a bad guy. There's usually no explanation for why beautiful women are attracted to bad guys. Obviously this has always been the case because there is an old saying, naughty boys sleep with beautiful girls. Neither of us were very drunk, and she never accused me of using any tricks to get her into bed. We were together that night, and then her boyfriend found us sleeping together. My ex-girlfriend's boyfriend threw his wedding ring at her, which obviously meant he was leaving her on the spot. When my now ex-girlfriend La returned from her wedding, she called me and told me she regretted the whole trip. I was right in saying that she was the only invitee without her significant other, which humiliated her and ruined the wedding. She tried to call me several times on Midsummer's Eve to ask for forgiveness, which I saw later when I checked my inbox on my mobile phone. She begged me to meet her and talk about our situation, which I agreed to. However, when she called me again an hour after finding out about my encounter with Lisette, she was beside herself and screamed that she was glad our engagement was over. It didn't bother me at first, but I called her several times after about 2 weeks when I expected her to calm down. Each time, I received the same response and an offer to go to hell. I also called Lisette several times, but she refused to meet with me. I had almost forgotten about her when she rang my doorbell 2 months later looking worried and wanting to talk. I asked her to come in and she got straight to the point, "I'm pregnant and you're the father." Then she began to cry. We talked for several hours and she told me that I was the first and only man she had ever been with. She intended to keep the child and asked if I was man enough to share the consequences of what we had done. What could I say? Even I realized that it was best for the child to have both parents, so I agreed to give our relationship a chance. Lisette was a beautiful, sweet and calm girl with a reputation as a family-oriented person. She wasn't as sweet as La, but she was still a good choice for a wife. We decided to get married as soon as possible. Of course, love is an important part of marriage, and neither of us could deny that there was some love between us. On that sacred night, we both believed that this feeling would grow stronger once we had a child. Lisette spent the night with me and told me she was very happy with my decision and intended to make the best of it. The next day, we went to her parents' house together to tell them the news. This was both the first and last time I visited her parents' home. Her mother turned my visit into a real fuss. Instead of trying to take advantage of the situation, she started yelling at me, calling me a bully who had dishonored her innocent daughter. She threatened to sue me and promised to punish me in every possible way. Her father was apparently driller. Lisette's mother began her vendetta by complaining to the unemployment fund that I had refused to accept a job offer, which was against the rules. She had nothing to prove this, so she then asked a lawyer to draw up a prenuptial agreement in which I had no rights to anything if things went badly between me and Lisette, which was exactly what her mother wanted. I asked Nicholas to rewrite the agreement to be more fair, and Lisette signed it without telling her mother. 2 months later, Lisette and I got married at the town hall. It was a simple ceremony with only 2 witnesses, Nicholas and Lisette's best friend. 5 months later, we had a wonderful boy. Our relationship gradually developed into something that could be called true love, and the next 2.5 years were the happiest, even very happy, of our marriage. A few months after our wedding, I had the opportunity to buy a rock drilling business on fair terms. The owner signed up for a beginner's square dance course and met a woman there. She was a doctor with only a temporary job at a local hospital. When she was offered a very well-paid position in northern Norway, she made an offer to a driller, who accepted and sold him his business. Since both the doctor and the driller signed a personal guarantee for me, I had no problem getting the bank to lend me the money I needed. When our son turned 2.5 years old and we sent him to kindergarten, problems began to appear. Lisette started working at the printing shop again, and as she was expected to become the next owner and boss, her mother's nasty influence grew. In good times, Lisette's greedy mother bought large amounts of stock and trusted her broker as her stock rose during a period when almost everything was increasing in price. However, when times got tough, her broker did a poor job, causing her to suffer significant losses before she could stop it. At the same time, I received some inside information from Nicholas, who was now a lawyer, about a sudden boom in a company. I bought shares and made a big profit. I couldn't resist the temptation to punish Lisette's mother, so I boasted to Lisette that, thanks to a new computer analysis program, I had made a substantial profit and there was more to come. I told her to go to our garage where there was a surprise waiting for her, a nearly new Toyota Yaris that I had bought at a bargain price so that Lisette could use it as a trade-in vehicle. Of course, she told her mother, who was jealous and wanted to find out about my next purchase. I asked Nicholas to find some real stocks and put together a very complex, seemingly nonsensical program in Excel that showed a very good expected return for Mega X stock. I'm sure Lisette looked at my laptop and told her mother, who then made a big investment right before the stock started dropping like a rock. One evening, Lisette asked me, "Did you lose money on Mega X stock?" I replied, "No, I bought some when they were low and sold all when they were high." "Good for us." "Why do you ask?" She responded, "I heard rumors that some people lost a lot of money on them." I said, "Playing on the stock market always involves risk." I won an important battle against her mother, but she suspected my advice was given on purpose. Rumors started circulating in the city that she intended to intensify her efforts to cause trouble for me. Her mother made a bet with her friends that she would convince her daughter to cheat on me, divorce me, and strip me of my property before our boys started school. Therefore, she always invited single young men from her business acquaintances to her parties, hoping one of them would seduce Lisette. Many of them were well-educated, polite, and some were even experienced seducers. Naturally, sooner or later, one of them would end up in her bed. She had a boyfriend when I met her, so why would she be different now, especially after being brainwashed by her mother? Her mother probably still thought that Lisette would have most of my property to invest in the printing plant, when I abandoned her after receiving more humiliation than I could bear. Hatred, revenge, and money were strong motives for her mother's dirty play against me. I told Lisette that I knew about the bet, and that if her mother found a guy to take her to bed, she would be kicked out immediately. Lisette got angry and screamed, "What the hell do you think of me? Don't you think I know about this damn bet? I'll be furious if anyone tries to do anything." I made it clear, "Good decision. Leave him and we won't need to discuss this further." When Lisette started working full-time, our family life began to slowly decline. I wanted us to have another child, but Lisette refused. At first I didn't complain much because Lisette worked hard to help the printing business survive, which her mother, with her old-fashioned ways, could have otherwise jeopardized. My business was doing well, so I asked Lisette to work for me instead of her mother, but she refused. With the rise in oil prices, a thermal heating system became a very good investment, which meant excellent business for me. Although I was very busy, I tried to help Lisette at home as much as possible. Our marriage wasn't great but remained at an acceptable level. Over the years after she returned to work, we still had good moments from time to time. I really tried my best to convince her to quit her poorly paid job and free herself from her mother's bad influence, but things went in the opposite direction. Lisette began taking the baby with her, and spent more weekends at her parents' dacha than at home. After a while I got tired of it and we had our first real fight. She realized that her mother was putting too much pressure on her and agreed to spend more time at home, but it was a promise soon forgotten. Just 3 months after our big fight, Lisette had returned to her old habits, which meant our social life with friends was reduced to a minimum. I was no longer naive and realized that after several years of fruitless attempts, her mother had finally succeeded in causing us to distance ourselves from each other. Our son mentioned something about Tommy kissing mommy when he came home from a weekend at her mother's house. It wasn't a surprise. These things were bound to happen sooner or later, and now I knew for sure that things had hit the fan. I realized that our marriage was close to becoming history despite my best efforts to be a good husband. I was saddened by my failure, but to my great surprise, a feeling of relief began to grow stronger. I could look forward to a future without a nasty mother-in-law who had tried her best to ruin my life in recent years. Lisette, to my growing disappointment, had always preferred to side with her mother, so I didn't care whether she chose her mother in her final decision. However, I felt it was my duty to give her one last fair chance to be a good wife again, and save the marriage if that was what she wanted. With him rather than with your husband. I noticed the momentary fear in her eyes again before she answered, "Strictly business, of course." "What the hell do you think of me?" "I don't know anymore. You cheated on your boyfriend when we met, so who's to say you won't cheat again? Don't insult me. This was different. I was young and fell in love with you, and you should know that I still love you." "You say that, but let's be clear about where we stand today. Lately you've been demonstrating very strange behavior. What you call love is nothing to brag about. Our marriage is a parody of a real marriage. You choose to leave your husband and spend the weekend with Tommy, who is clearly suffering from a lack of intimacy while his wife is away. Neither I know or anyone else with any common sense will believe that it's hateful old mother who craves his attention. But you, Lisette, are a very attractive young woman, and it's not entirely wrong to assume that intimacy with you might be his primary reason for staying in your damned country house. You keep saying you love me, but I don't understand how you think I will believe such nonsense after what you've done to me. I'm completely tired of your damn mother and her dirty tricks with our family. I'm ready to offer you fair terms for a divorce, so that you are free to do what you want with your dear Tommy." She wasn't expecting the divorce proposal, and her face turned ashen and gray as she screamed, "Divorce? Are you serious? You can't ask for a divorce just because I want to see my mother. Are you crazy? This is not a reason for divorce. No, it's not just that, but I don't see any good reason for you to see her from morning to evening, 7 days a week, every week. If your own family still means something to you, please give up Tommy and stay home this weekend so we can talk about our problems and try to find a solution before it's too late. Please do this if you still love me like you say you do." "Of course I love you, but I promised my mother I would come and I have to do it. I'm sorry but I can't stay with you. Please be patient with me, and I promise you will be well rewarded. Did you forget that next Friday is the summer solstice? We'll be together all day and we'll spend a whole week together 24 hours a day at the summer house in July. What a gracious offer. At the end of next month, I'll have a whole week with my dear beloved wife. What a gift from heaven. And may I assume that your concessions to me on the summer solstice are due to circumstances like Tommy's absence during the holidays? Maybe he's going to spend time with his wife and won't have time for you? Or do you still remember that I left Lottie because she left me on the summer solstice? Now she began to cry. You're funny. You're pathetic. Do you think it's funny being married to you? I have to say you have a strange way of showing your love. Well, Lisette, I know I can't stop you from seeing this Tommy because he's more important to you than your family. But you should take the child with you because I'm going to be working on drilling equipment tomorrow and won't be able to look after him. At this she got really angry and screamed, you accuse me of cheating. You treat me like a woman of easy virtue. Mother is right. You are a real idiot. Then she started crying loudly. I put an end to this and realized that something was happening between her and Tommy, but I didn't care anymore. There was probably nothing left of our marriage. However, I made one last attempt to save it. The only reason I hadn't left her yet and told her to stay out of our house forever was because I wanted to get a better divorce deal if caught her cheating. I saw no more point in arguing with Lisette, and felt it would be good for me to leave the house for an hour or two. I needed a big whiskey, and since I don't like drinking alone, I went to my favorite pub. It turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life. After a drink at the bar, I noticed Mona, a friend of my ex-girlfriend Lottie, sitting in the corner with her husband. I went up to them and asked her how Lottie was doing. She replied, you didn't know? She's back in town. She divorced Sven and bought a small house here. She moved in about 2 weeks ago. She was asking about you. Why don't you call her and talk to her directly instead of through me? Mona gave me Lottie's phone number, and I decided to call her right away. Of course, she could have asked me to go somewhere far away and leave her alone, but I thought those who don't take risks don't drink champagne. So I called her. Hi, I'm Michael, your old ex-boyfriend, if you remember me. Mona told me you were back in town, and I just wanted to say welcome back. Now came the critical moment. How would she react to my call? Much to my delight, she seemed glad to hear from me, and we had a long and pleasant conversation. She even accepted my invitation to lunch on Saturday. Afterwards, I was in a good mood and spent the rest of the evening with Mona and her husband. To my great relief, Lisette pretended to be asleep when I returned home, and I was asleep when she left for her mother's house on Saturday morning. I spent the morning servicing my drilling equipment, and at 1 p.m., I was standing outside the restaurant I had suggested for our lunch, waiting for Lottie. I can't deny that I felt almost the same excitement I did on our first date nearly 8 years ago. When I had waited for 15 minutes and Lottie still didn't arrive, I began to doubt whether she would come at all. But then she showed up. She was still a very attractive woman, and now even more feminine than when I saw her several years ago. We had a very pleasant lunch and decided to take a walk in the nearby park afterward. While walking, she suddenly asked, "What is your real reason for wanting to see me again?" "Faith, hope and love," I answered. She looked embarrassed before asking, "Can I tell you something I've been wanting to say for years?" "Of course, speak up." She admitted, "I made 3 big mistakes in my life. Going to that damn wedding was my first big mistake." "You were right. I was humiliated when the owners tried to set me up with the groom's brother. When the groom asked if I had feelings for his brother, I got angry, told him to go to hell with his brother and left the party. I didn't invite them to the wedding with Sven, which made them very angry. I thought you would forgive me and take me back when I returned home. But then Lottie's boyfriend called and said that you had taken away from Lisette what she wanted to save until the wedding night. I still loved you and was so angry that I refused to talk to you when you called. I only contacted Sven to punish you. I was going to leave him and return to you, but then Lisette became pregnant and everything got confused. I admired the way you took care of her, but I cried many nights because of my stupidity in losing you. Then I married Sven, which was my 3rd big mistake. If I hadn't been so stupid, we could have been married instead." I replied, "I too made a serious mistake by Lisette on the summer solstice. Of course, you and I broke up, so I was free to do whatever I wanted. But I should have used my common sense and tried to win you back before moving on. Believe me, I've regretted it many times, but it's never too late to try again, or is it?" She was completely surprised. "What did you say?" "Lisette and I have serious problems, serious ones in fact. I know she's cheating on me, but I don't have proof yet. Last night. You know the old saying, if you can't be with the girl you love, love the one who makes you happy. It worked well for us. Over time I grew very fond of her, a real, genuine love. But it's over now. What about you? Are you dating anyone? She looked me straight in the eye and said, yes, I met an attractive man online, but we haven't met in real life yet. Our first lunch date is tomorrow, so I'm late for the date. However, I would like to apply to be some kind of substitute for this lucky guy, just in case he doesn't turn out to be your dream prince. What do you say to that? She continued to look me in the eye and was silent for a few seconds before she replied, no, I don't think it's a good decision to have you as some kind of substitute, not at all. Then, noticing the great disappointment in my eyes, she continued, you are my first choice, and if you are serious and promise to be honest with me, I will not need any substitutes and I will cancel my date. It's my lucky day today. Remember, I never cheated on you when we were engaged. You left me and I was single when I met Lisette. I won't cheat on her until our divorce. But you and I have children almost the same age, and we can start as friends if you want. I have rented a nice summer house on the coast for the 3rd week of July, and I promise that Lisette and I will be separated by then. Lottie invited me to dinner at her house, and we began planning for the next weeks. Jennifer and I were already friends, and she had no bad feelings about her mother having a friend. I spent the night in Lottie's guest room, and we took a trip to the coast on Sunday. Lisette returned home late on Sunday evening, and we spoke little before going to bed. The next week also passed silently between us. Apparently, she was in a very bad mood after I proposed the divorce. The following Friday was the summer solstice. Lottie and Jennifer spent it with Lottie's parents, while Lisette and I were invited to spend the evening at a neighbor's house, where several families with children of different ages had gathered. We spent most of the day playing with the children, then in the evening the adults played some fun games and danced. But I hardly spoke to Lisette or danced a single dance with her. Usually she pretended to be a good, loving wife when we were in public, but this time, neither she nor I cared about everyone seeing the cold feelings between us. On the summer solstice, she went to see her mother but did not stay the night, perhaps because Tommy was not there. Lottie invited me to her parents' house, and I spent several hours there. They wished Lottie and me luck in our new relationship. The week after the summer solstice came and went with cold feelings between Lisette and me. We were polite and civil to each other, but neither of us showed the slightest trace of love. The following weekend, Lisette and our son went with her parents on a 3-day bus trip to Legoland, a famous amusement park for children. After that, she was going on her annual 2-day visit to her cousin. I was delighted to get 4 nights at Lottie's house. In case Lisette intended to fight for a divorce, it would be advantageous to remain on the right side, so we agreed to wait. Lottie, her daughter, and I had a nice time together while Lisette was away. Lottie and I found that we still really enjoyed each other's company, true love indeed. Lisette and I were usually very busy with our jobs in the summer, so we decided to have only 2 weeks of vacation each, and only one of those weeks together in a rented summer house on the coast. Instead of the usual summer vacation, we planned a trip to Thailand for 2 weeks in November. These plans had been made before Tommy came into her life, but under the current circumstances, I had no further intentions of going anywhere with Lisette. Instead, I promised Lottie that I would separate from Lisette before that week, and she agreed to spend it with me in the summer house. I was going to keep my promise. I think Lisette finally realized that the problems in our marriage were much more serious than she had realized, and began to try to pretend to be a good wife again. Much to my surprise, she called me all 4 evenings while she was away and told me how much she missed me. She never called me before during all those weekends she spent with her parents. Every time she called, I wanted to talk to our son. During their second day at Legoland, I asked him a few short, simple questions, all of which he answered yes to. One of these questions was, "Is Tommy with you?" and the answer was yes. I don't think any adults noticed. My guess as to the reason for her calls was that she felt remorse for taking Tommy with her. When they got home, I got further evidence from my boy during their one-night stop at home between trips. He asked me if it was true that evil wolves could enter our house and eat him. I asked him who told him such an evil lie. "Grandmother," he replied. "Why did Grandma tell you such a vicious lie? What did you do to her?" Nothing yet, but we have a secret, and if I tell you about it, the wolves will come and eat me. I tried a trick and asked him, what's the secret? It's not a real secret. Tommy was with you and Mom. Your mom told me that she and Tommy slept in one room, and you and Grandma slept in another. You knew my secret? Yes, I knew, but a secret is a secret. Of course there are no